Well, we'll probably have a few more folks join us here, but rather than delay, because I know there's a lot of information we want to share that Sean's looking forward to sharing, I think I will go ahead and mute everybody's microphones at this point. I'm going to stop sharing my screen as well and go in here and mute everybody.
I have the glasses.
Now we should all be muted. I'll leave the poll up here for a little longer if people join us. And Sean, I'll unmute you here in a moment as soon as I'm done with the introductions, but I think I have the spotlight right now. So I guess I'll go ahead and grab the spotlight. Yep, that's me now. Welcome everybody. I'm Clayton Cheever. I'm so glad you joined us tonight for our program on Brexit and its implications for Ireland. It's going to be a great program that I know everybody, you're all here, and I'm so glad you are. We're live streaming this on YouTube, and I'm actually going to turn on recording of this as well. So let me go ahead and, before I forget, turn on the recording right now. You'll get a notification that I am recording it. So now we're recording. We have a little poll up right now. If you can help us learn where you found out about this program, we're just looking for this. I'll end it here in a moment when I'm done with my remarks. But if you do come in and would like to tell us how you found out about this program tonight, I'd love to know, because we're trying to figure out how to get information out to the world. It's a new environment we're living in, so we're just trying to get our bearings. If you ever lose this connection or anything, we are going to be recording this, and you can go and see it on YouTube in the future. And we'll broadcast on QATV as well. So you can watch it as it comes around the news cycle and watch their scheduling there. QATV is now live streaming both channel 8 and 9. So anywhere you are, you're never too far from Quincy. And we have lots of library resources out there. If you did not see any of the news across the social media, we'll be making a much bigger splash about this soon. But the library has a new YouTube page, which you can find us by going out to YouTube and looking for the Thomas Crane Library. But we are developing a lot of video content. We have multiple playlists. And I encourage you to go, and if you're looking just to connect with people in the community, the YouTube is a great place to do it. There's lots of other spots. You can come out to our library.
Okay.
And do so much.
This article from
And it looks like, I'm not sure. I just heard somebody else's mic kick in, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that everybody's mics stay on. And we're going to keep it that way. During this program tonight, there will be time for questions, but I encourage you, if you have questions, to please ask them via chat. I'll be monitoring the chat channel, and I'll send out a note to everybody here once we get going, so you can see where it is in case you're not familiar. Because as soon as you get one, you should be able to click on it, and you can chat back to the entire group. Any questions that you ask, I will, when Sean is ready, he's going to take questions about halfway through, and at the end, I will summarize the questions that have come through and share those with him. You can also send me emails at ccheever@ocln.org. I'm not going to be watching my email during this program, but we can certainly do follow-up with that. I want to encourage you to keep tuning in. We've got another program out here on Zoom and live on Facebook tomorrow night. It's part of a series we've been doing, which is a guided listening series with Dr. Del Case. Dr. Case is a professor at Wheaton College and is helping us understand what really makes music that we love so fabulous. My family is looking over my shoulder and making fun of me, which is always great. This is the joys of doing these things from home. I hope everybody's comfortable. We're going to have a great program tonight. We're going to have a great program tomorrow night. So much of this and what we're able to do is made possible by the Friends of the Thomas Crane Library. You can hear my daughter promoting the Friends over the shoulder. I appreciate it, Sadie. Thank you. The Friends do so much when we're open and have a building in place. They run the bookstore and they have members, and are, even while we can't have the bookstore open because everybody's closed and sheltering in place right now, they're still providing support so we can bring programs to you. So please, if you're not familiar with the Friends, go out to our website, thomascranelibrary.org. In the bottom left, there's a little link where you can connect to the Friends and learn all more about them. For as little as $10 a year, you can become an official uppercase friend of the library yourself and help us put on these programs. We really appreciate it. So that's all I wanted to say. Just wanted to remind people again, it is being recorded. Please use the chat and enjoy yourself. I will now pass the spotlight and the microphone to Sean. Professor Murphy, however you'd like to be addressed, I'm just so glad you're here. Welcome. Oh, I think We are both trying to unmute your mic at the same time. I'll stop. You're still muted.
Okay, great.
There you go.
So hello, everybody. I know you can't talk back. You've been muted. So welcome. And for the next hour, I'm going to deal with a subject that I'm sure the fact that you've come tonight, you have an interest in and you've heard a little bit about. Obviously, in Ireland, there's been a lot of interest in Brexit for quite a while. I did a course at the Irish Cultural Centre in January. It was a 4-week course on this. So what I'm going to give you tonight is the shortened version of that. So what I'm going to go through with you, just so that, just to prepare you for it, I'm going to start off with a little bit of an introduction, which covers the current situation. I'm also going to introduce what the UK is, because this is, the Brexit is the UK leaving the EU. I'm going to then introduce you to a little bit of Irish history, a quick summary of the Irish and British connection, if you like. Then I'm going to be covering issues like the Irish backstop, and then I'm going to look at the specific arrangements that are in place right now regarding Northern Ireland. And then at the end, I'm going to look at some of the implications for Brexit. So I'm going to do this through a PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to start off now by sharing the screen. About halfway through, I will stop and answer any questions that you have sent on to Clayton. And then at the end, we'll be able to take any questions and we'll be able to open up the mics at that stage. So here we go. Let's see if this works. Okay. Now you should all see in a moment, you should all see a big screen that says Brexit and Ireland. Clayton, give me a thumbs up if that's what you're seeing. Okay.
We've got it.
Okay, so I'm going to start with a quote. Many of you may also realize that in the last decade or so, there's been phenomenal developments in Ireland in terms of political change. The main one being particularly in the south of Ireland, where Sinn Féin is now the largest political party in Southern Ireland and the second largest party in Northern Ireland. This is a quote from one of their members who is the Sinn Féin member for the European Parliament. And this was in January. And he says, but the fact remains that from this weekend, one part of Ireland will be in the EU, which stands for European Union, while another part will operate outside. The future trading relationship between Britain and the EU could yet create unprecedented difficulties for the Irish economy and vulnerable sectors, particularly agriculture. So a little quick overview. So where are we now? So Brexit is just an abbreviation for British exit, and it refers to the United Kingdom's decision in a June 2016 referendum to leave the European Union. At that time, the Prime Minister was David Cameron, and he had called the referendum under pressure from particularly the United Kingdom Independence Party and from members of his own party. He himself wasn't in favor of leaving the European Union, but he called the referendum as it was a campaign promise that he had made. When he lost, when people voted to leave, he announced his resignation the following day. There's a map just to give you an idea of the vote. So you can see all of Scotland, except from a little tiny few areas up on the islands way up at the top, voted to remain. In Northern Ireland, all of the areas that you would associate with being green with inside of the 6 counties of Ulster voted to remain. The parts that voted to leave are largely the unionist areas. And then in England, well, in Wales, there's a bit of a chunk of Wales there along the coast that wanted to remain. There's a significant area around London, but a lot of the rest were the ones who wanted to leave. And this is an issue now for the UK, because it's really becoming an issue where the UK is being reduced really to what England wants, not Great Britain or the UK. So Cameron left, and in comes Theresa May. Now, she hung around for a while, and then she had to step down as party leader in 2019 after facing severe pressure to resign, after she had failed 3 times to get a deal that she had negotiated with the EU approved by her own government. The following month, Boris Johnson, who was a former mayor of London, he was a foreign minister and editor of the Spectator newspaper, he was elected prime minister. He was what was described as a hardline Brexit supporter. He campaigned in 2019 on a platform to leave the European Union by the October deadline and said he was prepared to leave the EU without a deal, his do or die declaration. Now, in Ireland, particularly in Southern Ireland, that was seen as a basically throwing Ireland under the bus action. And one of the reasons why Sinn Féin did so well in the election was because for the first time, a lot of people in Ireland realized that the leaders in Britain, and particularly the leaders in England, had really no interest in what happened to Ireland. As I said, they were prepared to throw us under a bus. That's what his do or die declaration meant. Now, he didn't need to do the hard exit because they did negotiate a deal on October the 17th of last year. Now, the main difference from the deal that he negotiated and the deal that Theresa May was in relation to the Irish backstop. And I'll be talking about what the Irish backstop was in a minute, because it's no longer there. It was replaced with a new arrangement. Then he went to the country in an election, and in what was described as a stunning victory, the Conservative Party won 364 of the 650 seats in the House of Commons in Britain's 3rd general election in less than 5 years. So there was certainly an element of fatigue among the population at this stage. They wanted something to be done, so they voted in a party that would have a majority. So the United Kingdom left the European Union. The European Union is now an economic and political partnership of 27 countries, because one left from January the 31st of this year. And it brought an end to 47 years of British membership of the European Union and the institutions that preceded it, the European community, or the common market is what a lot of people might remember it as. So there's a transition period now. So we have until December the 31st of 2020 for the UK and the EU to reach a deal. Britain has an option if it wants to, if it needs more time, it can ask for that more time, but it has to do so by the end of June to request an extension. At the moment, they're saying they're not going to do that. Now, meeting that deadline would have been very, very difficult. It was a huge challenge even before coronavirus came along. Both sides were overwhelmed by it. Negotiators from both sides, the senior negotiators from both sides got the coronavirus, and also Boris Johnson. Talks were held up for 6 weeks. But as of the last few days, the British government is still rejecting all calls to extend the transition. So in other words, it's full steam ahead. And we know what happened to Titanic when full steam ahead went. Now I'm going to explain to you a little bit about the United Kingdom. There's a map of the United Kingdom, Wales, Scotland, England, and today Northern Ireland. Now, the United Kingdom comprises the whole of those areas that I just talked to you. It's referred today as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. How did that come about? Well, there was Acts of Union in 1535 and 1542. They were the first Acts of Union, and they united England and Wales. Again, England found itself militarily in a position to force the Welsh people to join at that stage. Then in 1652 and 1707, Scotland was brought into the Union, and then you had Great Britain. You had Scotland, England, and Wales, and that was known as Great Britain. Then in the year 1800, there was an Act of Union brought in, which led to the formation of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, because at that stage, Ireland was just one country. Now, the Irish War of Independence after 1916 and the War of Independence formally starting in 1919, that led to an Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1922 and to the formation of an independent Irish Free State. So the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland continued in name until 1927, when it was renamed the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. When we talk about Brexit, if Northern Ireland or any part of Ireland had not been part of the United Kingdom, the United Kingdom could have just walked away long ago from Europe. The problem was Ireland is divided. So it was trying to take away part of Ireland, which was a member of the European Union and was also linked to another body of land on the island of Ireland. So they couldn't do it. So it's one of those historical situations that things come around to bite you. So I'm going to give you a quick history of the Irish and British links. So England began its colonization of Ireland as far back as 1179 in what is known as the Cambro-Norman invasion. Cambro just means Wales. It was people from Wales initially. They're also known as the Anglo-Norman invasion. And in the following 300 years, England attempted to, but failed to take control of Ireland. But their presence did fundamentally change Ireland. Then, when the Tudors came in, and Henry VIII and Elizabeth I would be the two main people you might remember from that dynasty. When they came in the 1480s, they set out on a reconquest of Ireland, something that had failed over the previous 300. That was substantially achieved in the reigns of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. So Henry, when he came into power, when he took over from his father, he set out to remove power in Ireland from what are known as the Old English. And then, once he had that done, he wanted to subjugate the Irish chieftains. The Old English in Irish history, they're the descendants of the original invaders and settlers. And some of their number operated as the colonial administration for the British crown or the English crown and parliament at that time, because it still wasn't Great Britain. Now, the main dynastic Old English families were the Fitzgeralds, the Fitzmaurices, and the Butlers. And they were described by the English as being more Irish than the Irish themselves. You may have heard of that phrase. It was one that was used by the English, not by the Irish, and it was used as a term of derision because the English, in fact, hated the Old English more than they hated the Irish, because they felt that these people had sold them out. They had gone native. So the Reformation then provided further reasons to get rid of the Old English. In general, the Old English rejected the Reformed religion and remained Catholic. After years of unsuccessful attempts to be rid of them, Henry then, he tricked the Fitzgeralds into a rebellion. It was a rebellion which the Fitzgeralds lost. Because that was treasonous, Henry had all of the main line of the Fitzgerald families, and there were numerous families, arrested. They were executed, and then their lands and titles were removed. And that was the end of the great families of the Fitzgeralds, who owned at one stage, controlled and owned about, I suppose, 25 to 30% of Ireland. And they even had their own navy. With them out of the way, he then moved against the Irish clans. He introduced a scheme under pressure. He was threatening a military onslaught. So he introduced a scheme that's known in Irish history as surrender and regrant in the 1540s. And that required the Irish to accept English law and customs. And a lot of the Irish chiefs at the time did. They went in and they surrendered their lands and titles in return for new land deeds and titles. So they got a piece of paper. There was all sorts of things in the fine print that unfortunately a lot of them never read. Also, a lot of these people would have been known as kings in Ireland because at this stage every clan had its own king. And one of the deals now was that you could no longer call yourself king. Henry had declared Ireland a kingdom, and he was the king of the kingdom. So there was only going to be one king. So now they were all being called earls and barons, and all sorts of feudal titles were given out. Now, his scheme was seen for what it was very quickly. Essentially, it was just confiscation and subordination. And then a lot of Irish rebelled, particularly the next generation who rebelled against their fathers. And in some cases, they expelled their fathers from the clan lands. And over the next 50 years, the Irish fought then for a restoration of their lands, customs, laws, and independence. The end of that century then, between 1593 and 1963, the Irish rose up and almost had victory in sight, but they lost the Battle of Kinsale in 1601. And that effectively was the end of Gaelic society in Ireland. A Gaelic society is a society that was built by the Celts, and it had been going on at this stage for over 3,000 years. The plantation of Ulster then followed, because after the defeat of the Gaelic clans, what England did was they did the same as they had done with the Fitzgeralds. They confiscated all the lands, and they confiscated all the lands in Ulster. And then they successfully settled thousands of settlers from Scotland, England, and Wales. The settlers, one of the conditions of being a settler was that you had to be of the Reformed religion. And their settlement then led to divisions in Ireland, and that still characterizes Irish society to this day. If you want to understand why we have a divided Ireland, that is your starting point. One starting point was way back in 1169. That was when the English were introduced the first time. But from the plantation of Ulster 1610, the seeds were sown, which have created a situation where we've up to recently still been at war, and we have a country that is still divided. Now, so during the 17th century then, after they had destroyed the old Gaelic society and they had brought in their settlers and taken over Ulster, they were now for the first time in history able to control the whole of Ireland. And they extended that control and domination throughout that century. And they did it through confiscations of land, resettlements, internal and external exile, transportation of people, Irish people, introduction of new types of land use and ownership, etc., etc. Now, a primary focus at this stage then was to ensure that goods produced in Ireland did not compete with British goods in the colonies. And over time, the Irish economy was dismantled and turned into one simply designed around the interests of the English economy. So over the following 200 years, up to the time of the famine, Ireland then was bit by bit reduced from a society that was once self-sufficient, united in language and laws, and with a powerful history of cultural and religious achievements, to a country that was destitute, defeated, and unrecognizable as Ireland. The years of the penal laws beginning around 1695 and carrying on for the best part of 100 years, they represent the low point. By the time of the famine in the 1840s, about 5% of land ownership in Ireland was in Irish hands. Now, the progressive destruction of the Irish economic, social, and political institutions are the backdrop to the Great Hunger and Famine in the 1840s. The social life was destroyed. All of the old mechanisms for people to take care of one another, which were built into the old Gaelic laws and systems, and even ones that were developed when Ireland became Christianized, they were destroyed by the English. All the old political institutions were destroyed. So Ireland was a country that was devastated, torn apart inside and out. So the deaths and the subsequent immigration of Irish people then were thought to be the last gasp of the Irish. After the famine, the English felt that their Irish problem was dealt with. People were defeated. People had died. People were leaving in huge numbers. And in a sense, what happened in that century was the Irish substituted the term rising for rebellion. And to England's disbelief, they rose one more time. And that was in 1916. Then following the War of Independence, that for some people began in 1916, and with the formation of the Irish Free State, the major issue then for the new Irish state was its historic dependence on England. The new Free State started off in the 1920s with nothing but debt against the might of the empire. And at that stage, England was the greatest power that had ever existed. By the 1950s, then, the attempts to create a united Europe it opened up the possibility of finally getting off, if you like, the addiction to England. Ireland and the United Kingdom both joined the European Union in 1973. And initially, Ireland had to follow the UK lead. So whatever England decided to do, Ireland had to do. But over time, that changed. Over time, Ireland was able to break. The first thing it did was it broke the link with sterling. Then it began to attract foreign investment from Japan, from Germany, from the US, so that it wasn't as dependent on Britain. And then it eventually adopted the euro when the UK refused it. And all those were seen as positive things in terms of breaking the link and breaking the dependence on Britain. At the time, the partition of Ireland, at this time and all of the time, the partition of Ireland remained unresolved, and that led to the 30-year war from 1968 to 1998. So that's just a quick run through on Irish history. Now we're going to have a look at complications, and the biggest complication obviously is turned out for the British and for the English to be the fact that they had come into Ireland at all. Now they were in a problem that they couldn't do what they wanted to do because of the historic link. So after 800 years, Ireland now became the sword of Damocles around the neck of England. The land border in Ireland that the UK has with the rest of the EU, because remember, Southern Ireland is in the EU. So the UK has a land border with the EU in Ireland, and that prevented it from leaving on its own terms. They could have left if they had decided to say, well, we're going to hand Northern Ireland back to the Irish, but they were never going to do that. So in order for them to hang on to that part of Ireland that they had to try to find some way to manage that. If they had had no concern and no interest in Northern Ireland, they could have pulled away and they could have left the EU at any time. And they could have, in that sense, opted for a hard exit, because the hard exit, it refers to the fact that there's a border there. The hard exit would be for the UK to leave and for them to start building border posts and custom posts along the border between Southern and Northern Ireland. That's what a hard exit would have meant. So when the EU and Britain started meetings initially, there was a joint report in 2017, and it set down commitments from both the EU and the UK. One was they were committed to avoiding a hard border on the island of Ireland, because they all understood that could lead to a resumption of hostilities and war, which they didn't want. Then we had the 1998 Good Friday Agreement, which brought an end to the 30 Years' War. And that meant that now they had to protect, the commitment had to be to protect what was signed in that agreement. So that meant they had to protect North-South cooperation, and they had to uphold all of the parts of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. That was the baseline in the withdrawal agreement that the EU was trying to, that the UK was trying to negotiate. Now, enter Ireland once more. So from the time that England came in, throughout time, there were always situations in which, because England had interests in Ireland, and those interests aligned themselves with sides in the UK. So at times then you had people from Ireland who were either descendants from one set of colonizers or another, who possibly could hold the balance of power in Parliament in England. So that was an issue that arose periodically. So a small political party could hold the balance of power in the UK Parliament. And that happened then in 2017, after Theresa May called a snap election. She called the snap election after she became leader. She had a very tiny minority, and she wasn't sure that she would be able to hold her party together. So she thought that now that she was the new leader and that people wanted to get rid of David Cameron, she thought that if she held a quick election, she might get some more support, but she didn't. She lost her majority, and then she had to look around for people that might support her. So she turned to the Northern Ireland Extreme Democratic Unionist Party that was co-founded by Ian Paisley. So at that stage, negotiations with Brussels were due to start. So she cut a deal with the Northern Ireland Unionist Party. She then negotiated a withdrawal deal with the EU in November of 2018. She made 3 attempts to get that accepted by her government, and she failed every time. And in the end, she had to resign. Now, even though she had made that deal with the DUP failed to support her every time because they rejected the Irish backstop that was built into her deal. Because in negotiations with the EU were not prepared to go for a deal that abandoned Northern Ireland, or that would force it into a situation where you could end up with a physical border being created again. For the DUP, what they saw the Irish backstop as a weakening of the union with Britain. So let's have a look at what the Irish backstop was. So it was the name given to a protocol appended to the draft Brexit withdrawal agreement that was made between the May government and the European Union in November 2017. Its aim was to prevent what was described as an evident border, which would be one with customs controls. In other words, one where people would have to queue up, get searched, and move on. And there would be, along the whole line of the border between Northern and Southern Ireland, every few miles, there would have to be a border post to prevent unauthorized access. So that was what they aimed to do. Now, the backstop aimed to prevent a hard border, and it was going to do so by keeping Northern Ireland in some aspects of the single market, the single European market, until an alternative arrangement was made. So in other words, what was going to happen was that the laws of Europe were going to apply in Northern Ireland indefinitely until the EU and the UK came up with an arrangement that was agreeable to the European Union. So the proposal provided for the UK as a whole to have a common customs territory with the European Union until the solution was delivered, to avoid the need for customs control. Essentially what that meant was that because at that stage, the UK, they couldn't figure out what kind of a deal was going to work. And they didn't want to commit themselves to having to agree something with Europe. So and that's what the backstop was. The backstop was saying that until such a time as the UK agrees with the EU, Ireland and the whole of Ireland will remain within the European Union. That was the backstop. That's what the backstop meant. What that guaranteed was that there wouldn't be a physical border in Ireland, but the people like Boris Johnson were totally opposed to this, and also the Democratic Unionist Party. So the backstop element was that the arrangement would continue, as I said, to apply until a solution was agreed, even if there was no trade agreement between the UK and the EU by the end of the transition period. So the UK figured that was too much. They couldn't go for that. They felt that was more, I suppose, blackmail, and they weren't sure what kind of a deal that they could ever end up. But certainly the hardliners in the party were not prepared to accept that they couldn't make their own decision, that they would be held back from exiting until such a time as they had to agree some deal. So then May resigned and Johnson renegotiated the agreement, and his agreement proposed, and this is, I'm quoting from them, that Northern Ireland will be de jure, in other words, in law, in the customs territory of the United Kingdom, but in fact, it'll be in the European Union Customs Union and European Union Single Market. Now, if you're having difficulty understanding that, that gives you an idea of the complexities of the situation and the knot that the UK got into because of its desire to hold on to Northern Ireland. So I'm going to stop there for a couple of minutes and see if there's any questions. Are you there, Clayton?
I am here, yes. We have not had any questions yet on chat, but I would certainly welcome anybody who is trying to puzzle this out or has anything that they'd like to share even at this point, to put something in the chat, and they can certainly I'm watching the chat, and you can do that either. You can make a comment in the chat on YouTube or here in Zoom. I'm looking at both. So
Great. So while you're thinking about your questions, just to let you know, some of you probably know already that I give Irish history courses, and I do it up your way in the Irish Cultural Centre of New England. And in the next 2 weeks, I've got 4 courses that are starting. One is on the ancient history of Ireland. That goes back 1.7 billion years. And I'll be covering everything from that point up to the arrival of the Celts in Ireland. So the first 2 weeks of that will really be the geological history of Ireland, and then we'll be looking at the arrival of peoples. Another course I'm doing is on a county in Ireland, County Louth, which is the county that St. Bridget was born in. It's also the county of, County Louth is called after a famous Irish warrior called Lugh, or Lug. Now Lug is famous. Some of you may have heard of Dancing at Lunasa. Well, that's called after Lug. Lunasa is the month of August. So in Gaelic, August is Lunasa. So again, he's got a month of the year called after him. And the festival of August is also called after him. That's just 2 of them. And then I've got 2 courses on the Irish Republic of Ireland, the history from 1937 to 68 and from 1998 to 2020. So if you're interested in any of those, you could contact the Irish Cultural Centre in Canton, or maybe you could let Clayton know and he could pass your information on to me. So any questions there, Clayton?
we have not any questions yet, but I will also put in a plug. That's great that you're obviously, there's a lot to chew on here. We're doing a very quick overview. We're going to do a quick overview in 2 weeks as well, when we do a Irish History 101 on the 26th, I believe it is. So 2 weeks from tonight. Did I get the date right? I think I may have the date wrong. I'll have to double check that. I'll let people know at the end and they can check the calendar.
Okay.
I did have one question. I had a question for you, Sean. Even though, if other folks aren't asking questions, I'll ask one question. Oh, somebody beat me to it. So before I get to, we have a couple questions for us. First question that came in was, what happens now when people go from the Republic of Ireland to Northern Ireland? Are there border controls in place between those 2 political entities?
No. There's after the Irish War of Independence, a part of the agreement that was entered in the 1920s created what's called a common travel area. So people from Ireland could travel, anywhere in, Scotland, England, Wales, and Ireland, and English people and Scottish people can do the same. So you can move freely between Scotland, England, Ireland, and Wales if you're a person on any of those countries.
So what you were just talking about in this hard exit was talking about putting a border, or trying to avoid a border between Northern and Southern Ireland. So if that's avoided and Ireland is still in some way part of the EU, would that mean there would be a border around Southern Ireland between Ireland and England?
Well, I'll be coming to that now.
That's the next part. Okay. There's one other question then before we go there, which was that if you imagine that Sinn Féin will be able to capitalize on its recent success and expand its political base in the Irish Sea, especially.
So I say that again.
So wondering if you imagine that Sinn Féin will be able to capitalize on recent successes and expand its political base.
Sinn Féin.
Sinn Féin. I'm sorry. Yeah. Sinn Féin. Yes.
Yeah. Yes, it will be. It was probably in a situation where it might have been able to form a government, but then the coronavirus came. So basically, the whole creation of a new government in Southern Ireland had to be put on the back burner because you had to have a government. So the people who were in the last government basically had to run the show for the moment. But yeah, I mean, Sinn Féin should be able to develop, over the next 20 to 50 years. Yeah, it should.
I will let you know if we have any other further questions, and we'll have time for questions, I know, here at the end. So,
okay. So we're going to have a look then at the future relationship then between the UK and the EU, and in particular, you know, how that affects Northern Ireland. And that was one of the posters that were used during the campaign. Some people were saying, say goodbye to Europe, or, you know, see you later. So after Brexit, then Northern Ireland will be outside of the European Union, while the Republic of Ireland will remain inside. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, the UK and the European Union agreed that this should not lead to new checks or controls on goods crossing the border between the two parts of Ireland. So that's what's been agreed. But, you know, down the road, depending upon who is in power in Britain, they could renege on all of this. We've no guarantee that anything will stay as it is. There's no guarantee that the commitments that had been made to ensure that the 1998 agreement is held in place, we've no guarantee that that will actually happen. They could renege on that at any time, depending upon, and Boris Johnson, as I said earlier, was willing to do that. Now, fortunately, he did manage to get a deal with the EU, which prevented the hard border. So so I said here, the European Union and the UK have agreed then that there won't be a border. Now, to achieve that, Northern Ireland will continue, and this is complicated. You're going to have to maybe read some of the articles that are given, you know, on the links. But to achieve this, what's going to happen then is Northern Ireland will continue to follow the European Union rules of agriculture and manufactured goods, while the rest of the UK will not. So remember, Northern Ireland will still be a member of the UK. So now some of the rules will apply differently. Some of the rules will apply to the EU rules will apply in Northern Ireland, but they won't apply inside the rest of the United Kingdom. Now, the whole of the UK will leave the European Union's custom union, but Northern Ireland will continue to enforce the European Union's custom code at its ports. That's going to mean that there will have to be some new checks and processes for goods moving between Northern Ireland and other parts of the UK. So it gets complicated. And at the moment, most of this is just, you know, paragraphs. The issue is going to become, how can you come up with a system to make this work? And that's what's missing in terms of the puzzle at the moment. The actual practicalities of how you turn these, you know, phrases into actions. So the United Kingdom and the EU now have to negotiate the nature and extent of those checks. And it gets complicated because at the moment, Boris Johnson is basically denying that he's kind of saying, well, there won't be any checks. So during the election campaign, he insisted that for goods moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, there would be no forms, no checks, no barriers of any kind. But then the EU, the European Union, is equally clear that the deal means that goods going from Northern Ireland to Great Britain will face a new administrative process known as an exit declaration. So they're already fighting over that. Now, the Prime Minister has also told MPs that goods then moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland will remain unfettered. But the EU has said there will have to be new checks, particularly on food products. So clearly, there's a lot of things to be negotiated and smoothed out. So let's have a look then at the Northern Ireland specific arrangements that were contained in the deal that was worked out with Johnson and the EU. And just to give you an idea of the flavor of things in Northern Ireland, here's a big poster. This is done by people who wanted to leave. And obviously these are people who, for them, the union with Britain is the most important thing. So Ulster will always remain British, no surrender. Now, the EU's chief negotiator explained at a press conference that the replacement of the Irish backstop, because that's what was different between Theresa May and Boris Johnson. In Theresa May's proposal, there was an Irish backstop, and I said the backstop meant that there could be no agreement made well, not that there was no agreement, but until an agreement was made between the United Kingdom and the European Union, that the whole of Ireland would continue to remain in the European Union. So he replaced that with his New Deal. Now, his New Deal rests on four main elements: regulations, customs duties, VAT, that's value added tax, and consent. Now, I said a minute ago, you asked me a question. This is how they talk about it on paper. You may have heard talk about a line down the Irish Sea. So that's what they're trying to do. Because they can't have a land border, they're talking about having, if you like, a virtual border down the Irish Sea. And again, no one knows how this will work. So what you're looking at here is goods dispatched from Great Britain. They would have to come into Northern Ireland through some process that has yet to be agreed upon and worked out. Now, at one level, if they come into Northern Ireland, well, they're just coming into the EU. So some people would say, well, there shouldn't be anything happening. They should just be able to come in. But of course, the problem is, because there's no customs, well, then that means that people could send things into Northern Ireland. They just move on down to the south and then just head back into the European Union, thereby basically getting over all of the tariffs or restrictions that there might be on the movement of goods from Britain to the European Union. So what they're doing then is when goods come in, tax paid by firm, the tax would be paid then by firms receiving goods in Northern Ireland. So if you're receiving goods from the mainland, that's what they call it, you're going to be paying tax. Now, if the goods stay in Northern Ireland, you're going to get that tax refunded. If the goods move to the Irish Republic, and from the Irish Republic, they can go wherever. But if they go there, there's no refund. So that's the kind of way that they're presenting it. Now, under the withdrawal agreement, a customs border will effectively be created between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, as represented by the line down the Irish Sea. Now, some goods entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain will be subject to checks and will have to pay European Union import taxes or tariffs. And as I said, they then would be refunded if the goods remain in Northern Ireland. In other words, if they're not moved to the Republic of Ireland. And they haven't figured out that, but again, people are talking about the use of technology and various other ways to ensure that they can keep track of goods. I suppose something along the line of the tracking technology that USPS and all of the other companies have with goods. You can put a chip on something or whatever, and you can know where it ends up. And if it doesn't end up where it was designated to go, well, then you can take the appropriate action. So this is what's new then. This is what replaces the Irish backstop, Articles 5 to 10. And they cover customs, movement of goods, value-added tax, UK internal market, technical regulations, and the single electricity market. Now, at the end of the day, Northern Ireland will be able to opt out of those articles, 5 to 10. They're in the agreement, but they can be removed at some point in the future, and they can be done so following a vote by the Northern Ireland members of the Legislative Assembly. They're the people that are elected to the Assembly in Northern Ireland. And I'll explain how that works as we go through. But the rest of the protocol will continue to apply, but Articles 5 to 10 can be removed. So Northern Ireland is part of the customs territory of the UK, so it will be incorporated into all future UK trade agreements, whether it be with Japan, China, the US, whatever. Yet the European Union's Union Customs Code will apply in Northern Ireland and not in Great Britain. So again, somebody's going to have a job, to write up the guidelines for how to implement that. In terms of value-added tax, Northern Ireland will apply the European Union's value-added tax rules, which will not apply in Great Britain. It's possible that in Great Britain, they might have the same rate, but they're likely to fluctuate. The issue there is that they want to make sure that they don't create the opportunities for smuggling to occur. If the tax rates are different between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, well, then people would either go to shop in Northern Ireland or they would, if they were in Northern Ireland, if there was if it meant that you get a better deal by going to the south. So they want to make sure that there's no difference in the VAT rates, so that you don't create an incentive for people to start traveling from one part of the state to the other just to pay less. So the single market for goods, well, Northern Ireland will follow the European Union's rules and regulations which affect trade in goods, including product regulations, environmental standards, sanitary and phytosanitary standards, and state aid. These will not automatically apply in Great Britain, and it's likely that they won't. They could, there's no reason why they may not, but it depends on how close the EU wants to, if you like, be aligned with Great Britain. But the whole point of leaving, the whole point of Brexit was so that Great Britain could move away from a lot of the regulations and rules. And then Northern Ireland will have to follow the European Union regulations governing wholesale electricity markets. So that's been agreed. So let's have a look then at some potential controls on movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So I hope you're staying with me. This is pretty complex. If you want a copy of this presentation, if you let Clayton know, I can send you an electronic copy of the presentation. So
if you'd like, Sean, I can even make a copy available through our website that people could download. So if you send it to me, I'll just promise to put it up there so people can watch, and I'll do a blog post for it. You can just watch the front page of the library. We'll put it there.
Right. I'll do that.
Thank you. Great.
So then the declarations then in regards to the movement from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. So Northern Ireland will apply, as I said earlier, the European Union Customs Code. That means that exit summary declarations are compulsory in the absence of customs declarations. All goods moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain will have to make those declarations. And again, this is something that Boris Johnson is trying to downplay, because the issue here is what goods would be included that would need those summary declarations. And that hasn't been discussed as yet. And certainly it's going to take a while to agree. Animal products, well, products of animal origin moving from Great Britain into Northern Ireland will have to be subject to documentary and physical checks, even if there's not a tariff issue, because of we've had in the past things like mad cow disease and various other diseases that has to be taken care of. So Great Britain then to Northern Ireland, well, it's likely that all commercial products then going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland will need to be subject to customs declaration, especially if the future United Kingdom, European Union relationship is a simple free trade agreement. Great Britain to Northern Ireland tariffs, well, there could be tariffs on goods going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, which are deemed to be at risk of entering the single market. There will be a tariff rebate if the goods remain. So the issue there is, can they agree on what goods might be at risk of entering the single market? If things are targeted to go to a factory in Northern Ireland, how do you know that they're not double ordering and then that they're moving on half that they're not going to use to Southern Ireland, which then goes back to someplace in the European Union? So they have a lot of work on their hands there. Now, as I said earlier, the thing about these articles is that they can change, not so much they can change, but they can be taken out. So there's a process proposed for affording or withholding consent from Northern Ireland for the application of the Articles 5 to 10 that I've just outlined. So according to the UK's unilateral declaration on consent, the objective is to achieve agreement that is as broad as possible in Northern Ireland. So on consultation, the intention is that agreement will be found via a thorough process of public consultation, including cross-community and cross-sectoral, led by the Northern Ireland Executive and supported by the UK government. The Northern Ireland Executive is basically your cabinet, and then that has to be supported in turn by the UK government. The Belfast Good Friday Agreement institutions, all the institutions that were set up under that, have to be involved in the consultation. And that will involve Southern Ireland as well, because some of the institutions that were set up are north-south bodies. Now, to get around to the vote then. So the members, this is the way it's going to work. The members of the legislative assemblies, who are the people that are elected, they will be voting 4 years after the end of the transition period on the motion put forward that Articles 5 to 10 will continue to apply in Northern Ireland. So at the moment, the transition period ends at the end of this year. Now, if by June, if England decides that it wants an extension, it can look for an extension for up to 2 years. So that would mean that it could end up in the 4 years could end up being 2026. The motion, they've already agreed on the wording for the motion, so that they can't fudge what the motion has to be, so that Articles 5 and 10 will continue to apply. Now, they're also covering the situation if there's no sitting assembly. You may or may not be aware, but since 1998, the assembly has been suspended, I think it's 5 times, and the last time it was suspended for 3 years, from 2017 to January of this year. So they're including then, you know, they're allowing for the fact that there might be no sitting assembly. And in that case, the United Kingdom government will convene the elected members for a vote. And it's going to be that those present and voting are the only ones who will be considered. And that's intended to make sure that the vote couldn't be boycotted. There's no quorum. So even if 2 people turned up, then the majority would win out. So that's the way that it's left. Now, in terms of the outcome, the first thing is if there's a cross-community vote in favor. In other words, if the parties who identify, because in the Assembly in Northern Ireland, you have to identify as basically being a member of the nationalist community, or you have to identify as being a member of the unionist community. And there are parties then representing both communities. So for a cross-community voter in favor, then the next vote then would be in 8 years' time. So the first time around, if a majority in both communities vote for it, there wouldn't be another vote until 8 years. If it's a simple majority vote in favor, the vote would have to be taken 4 years. And during that 4 years, there would have to be an independent review carried out to find out what the problem is, you know, why people did not vote for it on both sides. Now, if they vote to opt out, Articles 5 to 10 will no longer apply after 2 years. So if they voted to leave, then the articles will continue for 2 years. Now, the choice is framed in a particular way. It's framed as a binary one. In other words, if you opt out of the EU rules, you're doing so in order to follow the United Kingdom rules on customs, goods, etc. So that's the only way that the choice can be framed. You can't change the wording on it. You can't fudge it in any way. So the joint committee would make recommendations as to measures necessary to avoid a hard border at any future point. Now, what these are would depend on the nature of the European Union and the United Kingdom's relationship at that point. The big issue is if there were political parties in Northern Ireland who, for some reason, wanted, you know, to defeat the 1998 agreement, or if there was a government in the UK that felt that they didn't need to take into account how things would work out in Northern Ireland, or if there was leadership inside of the EU. So there's all sorts of combinations of things that could happen that could end up in a situation where a hard border could emerge in the short term, medium term, or long term in Ireland. There's no guarantees. So we'll take a quick look at Brexit then and Irish unity. So the first thing we can say is that Brexit, it swept away all the old assumptions about the constitutional, political, and economic status quo, and has created unprecedented changes to the political landscape, north and south. One of them, as I said earlier on, being the fact that now Sinn Féin is the largest party in Southern Ireland. Also, the debate on Irish unity is growing in momentum partly because Sinn Féin is the party, because Sinn Féin is committed to Irish unity. Other parties that are nationalist are also, but for them, it's never been a big issue of pushing it forward. But Sinn Féin will do that. So the growing centrality then of Irish unity to the political and civic discourse is one of the unintended consequences of Brexit. Things have got to the stage that they wouldn't have been. Now, one of the things that happened in Southern Ireland was that the debate on Brexit alerted a lot of people, particularly people who were only children or maybe weren't even born back in 1998. So for a lot of people, a lot of young people in particular, it was the first time that they actually understood the nature of the relationship between Ireland, particularly Northern Ireland, and Britain. And when they saw Boris Johnson being prepared to throw Ireland under a bus, and knowing full well that to do so could end up with a war beginning in Ireland again, for a lot of people, what that meant was that the things that Sinn Féin had been saying to them were the ones they should have been listening to, not what the other nationalist parties like Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael had been saying. And that was one of the reasons for the significant advance in the vote for Sinn Féin. Now, other issues then around independence. Well, Scottish independence has been re-energized, as reflected in the most recent opinion poll, which shows a new surge in popular support for Scottish independence. Because what they're saying now is the last time we had a referendum in Scotland, well, there was no issue about the EU, whereas now the issue is we want independence from Scotland because we want to be an independent Scotland in the European Union. We don't want to be any longer in the United Kingdom. So that's a big issue. So it's in a major development in January, just a couple of months back, the regional parliaments, because there's regional parliaments now in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, they all refused consent to the British Parliament to legislate for Brexit on their behalf. You know, again, it's a question of power. The UK government would go ahead and do that, but the local parliaments are not agreeing with them. So what that means is that the entire constitutional basis of British politics is being challenged. Britain, or Brexit, has polarized British society in a way that we haven't seen before. And really what's happening now is the concept of a British government and a British parliament is increasingly mutating into an English government and an English parliament, because it's the people in England that are driving this bus over a cliff or whatever, and the rest of the UK is not happy with that. So just to finish up, a couple of issues. One, the recent election in the Republic. I think I've outlined to you there the effect that Brexit, had on that. The other side of that was in the run-up to the election in Southern Ireland, the other main parties thought that Sinn Féin were going to do poorly. And they tried a number of things that backfired on them. One was they tried to get Sinn Féin banned from the public debates on the main media. When they didn't succeed in doing that, the leader of Sinn Féin was a woman, and the leader of the other two major parties were men. And the two men kind of were seen literally ganging up on her to try to shout her down, to try to embarrass her, to try to humiliate her. And that completely backfired on them all, particularly with young people, because the issue now is that the majority of young people are supporting Sinn Féin and not supporting the other parties. So that's a bad sign for the other parties, because if you don't have the support of the people coming up, well, that's going to be difficult. And as is also the regional parliaments have shown where they stand. And of course, the other big issue now at the moment, and I think it's going to come back and haunt Boris Johnson, his judgment in relation to coronavirus has been shown to be totally unwise. He was the one who allowed the Cheltenham races to go ahead in March, 4 days where there was no possibility for social distancing. He was one who's basically, thinking of, I don't know what kind of a herd he was talking about, but his herd mentality was such that he was welcoming people getting out there and getting this thing and getting over it. Now, the news today is that the number of people dead in England has surpassed that in Italy. And that's going to come home and bite him. At the same time, he is rushing to the exit on Brexit. He doesn't want to apply for an extension of the deadline, even though everybody knows that at a minimum, the fact that they've lost so much time because of the coronavirus, that they should be looking for an extension to give time. So his judgment and his leadership is likely to be called into question by a lot of people. So I'm going to leave it there and take any questions. I have some at the end of this here. There's some articles and some websites that you can read. So I will certainly make those available to the library. And so hopefully that wasn't too technical. It's kind of difficult. And as I said, in terms of the future arrangements, it's all one level. You could say it's all pie in the sky, because they haven't come up with a manual that says how we're going to operate this. And the transition is aimed, the transition period is over at the end of this year. And even at this stage, people don't know what that means. No one is even in a position to begin to seriously prepare. If they continue and if it's a last minute deal, well, then all of the physical infrastructure that's going to be needed, because there will have to be exit declarations, there will have to be visual checks on animals and goods and whatever, but there won't be time to put all those in place. So hopefully the English people in particular will have the wisdom to see through the nonsense that's been foisted on them, and will put pressure on them to look for that extension, so that that things can be done properly. Any questions there, Clayton?
So, Sean, there was one question which I know you covered some of, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to summarize it appropriately. But the question was, wondering if you could address and further go into how long before Northern Ireland could have the option to vote in a North Ireland referendum, similar to the Scottish independence referendum.
What there is,
independence movement.
Yeah, there is provision for in the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. There's what's called a border poll, and in the 1998 agreement, the things that are different. One is that Britain has made a commitment, and the commitment means that it is now seen as legitimate to have the objective of a united Ireland. Britain is accepting that. And in the 1998 agreement, they had to commit to a situation whereby if the majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to be part of a united Ireland, that they would have to go along with that and make sure that it happened. So they had to agree to that. Now, Johnson could turn around. We know what happens with presidents and prime ministers. They can turn around and say, oh, well, that was 40 years ago or 30 years ago, whatever, it doesn't apply to me. I'll bring it to my high court or something and get it thrown out, or my Supreme Court or whatever. So we don't know how that might work out. But in the spirit of the 1998 agreement, which we're still supposedly working in under, Britain would have to be the guarantors of the outcome of that border poll. The other issue is that the border poll can only be called by the Secretary of State. He can only do it. If he believes that the outcome would be support for a united Ireland. He can't call it if it's obvious to him or her that the result would be the opposite. So you can't have a situation where you have a pro-unionist Secretary of State who decides to call a border poll knowing that it will lose. In other words, that there'll be a vote to remain. Because realistically, you can't have polls every couple of years. Realistically, if you're going to have polls, it could be once a generation, so you can't really call it at the wrong time. The other problem is it was also agreed that, on a border poll, it's a majority plus one. It wasn't going to be cross-community. It didn't require in Northern Ireland that a majority of Unionists and a majority of Catholics voted. A majority of one is all that's needed. Problem with that is, well, how would the loyalist paramilitaries respond? And that's, an unknown at the moment. Certainly, they would not be in favor of a united Ireland. and it's quite likely that they might escalate or start a campaign. They could have a campaign leading up to the polls. You know, they might start carrying out terrorist attacks to prevent people going to the polls. If the poll was successful, they might then try to carry out a campaign against the institutions that have the responsibility to further the process of integration of the two countries. And then, of course, there's the other issues about who's going to pay for the unification. You know, will Britain, you know, agree, you know, to continue to make payments, you know, to make that happen, or will most of the cost have to be found within Ireland itself? That hasn't been answered yet. Properly speaking, you know, England, you know, should continue for a long time putting in the money that it's already putting in at the moment, but putting it in for better reasons. So that's about it. Have I answered the question?
Sorry, I'll let people let us know in the chat whether they would like. There's a yes. You did answer the question. People have any follow-up questions? There's another question in here that you talked a lot about goods and how a border in the Irish Sea could potentially and how tariffs and everything could impact the flow of goods between mainland European Union and Ireland and the impact between Ireland and England. There's a question about Brexit's impact on the transportation of citizens, European Union citizens coming from other countries in the European Union who come to England or Ireland to work, and what this, how is this going to impact the lives of people with families that are in various places too? Because we're not talking about just goods moving back and forth. We're talking about, brothers and sisters and couples and lots of labor.
Yeah. Well, the problem was in 2006, I think it was, there was an agreement, which basically opened up the whole of Europe, so that the countries that had formerly been in Eastern Europe had been part of the old Soviet bloc. They had joined, and at that stage, then they were all admitted. I think there was about 13 or 14 countries admitted. Sorry, was it 9? I can't remember. It was quite a substantial number of countries from Eastern Europe. So at the time, England had the option of putting restrictions, on the travel of those people coming into England, but it chose not to. Some countries did. Ireland didn't, Britain didn't, and Sweden didn't. Lots of other countries restricted the travel of people, which they had the right to do for something like seven years. So partly because a lot of countries had restrictions, well, then there was only a small number of countries that people could go to. And if you were living in some of the countries in Eastern Europe, where there was really very little job prospects or whatever, well, you kind of wanted to move. Now, at the time in Britain, the population was such that the population of England was kind of going up and down, and they needed people coming in, and particularly people who would come in to do manual labor and other works that the kind of educated English people didn't want to do, and substantial numbers of people came in, and that was really the reason why the whole Brexit thing took off, because a lot of English people were upset about all these people arriving from Eastern Europe. That was a large part, of it. In Northern Ireland, you have a problem as well, particularly among loyalists. A lot of people from Poland. There's a lot of people from Poland, and there's people from Asia as well there, and they're the ones who get attacked and beaten up in Northern Ireland by loyalists, by and large, because there is, a kind of a sectarianism, but people will be, people will still be able to move, into Southern Ireland from anywhere in Europe. It's not clear then, if they come to Southern Ireland, if they would then be able to go to Northern Ireland. They probably will. The way the English are kind of thinking about it at the moment is that they seem to be at one level only concerned if people come and start applying for benefits. They don't have that much of an issue if you come on vacation and leave, or if you come and you work and, you know, have money. So they figure, well, we'll be able to figure out who's who when we see the applications coming in for whether it be rent money or for social security or whatever, because then they'll be able to track those people back. So they're using that as a kind of administrative process instead of having customs control where people have to show their passport and have a visa or whatever, because they can't do that. So they're going to use administrative measures to try to figure out movement of people that they don't want. And then they can go after that person. If they find that somebody has identified themselves as being there when they shouldn't be because they've applied for rent money or they've applied for social security or whatever, well, then the idea then is that they'll be able to locate those people and remove them. That's the way they're thinking about it.
Do you think there'll be a stigma in European Union countries against people from England and Ireland potentially being part of the same thing, who come and wish to do the other, who, you know, always said, oh, you know, we've been living in England, but my family's in Paris, and, you know, returning to Paris or returning to property or to family there? Is there going to be a problem with people trying to do that kind of travel?
No, I mean, there's never been any problem, you know, like if I mean, I experienced it myself. If you go to Europe, you know, when I was young, you know, going to Europe, because you spoke English, you know, people couldn't tell where you were from. So the first thing that people would do is figure out if you were English. And as soon as you said, no, I'm Irish, then it was open arms. If you were English, it was, you know, because English people are not liked by a lot of people on the continent. So, but if you're Irish, you can go anywhere.
I'm looking to see if there's any other questions. There's concern that a hard border would, even if it wasn't political, there's issues that we could have a reference to the Troubles and a resumption of the Troubles again. And so there's some fear there for sure. I don't know if you'd like to say anything more, if you have anything if you think things are in a different place, or if you see some concern for, you know, reasons why we should really be taking the lead and how do we bring people together.
Yeah, well, the main thing, I mean, the main issue that's coming up now with Brexit is that the threat of a return, you know, to violence is not coming from the people in Ireland. The threat is coming from the politicians in England and, you know, from England. So again, it's just one more example of how, you know, England has interfered, you know, with Ireland to such an extent that now we've had, you know, over 800 years in which things have gone sideways for Irish people simply because of the intrusiveness of, England into the affairs of Ireland. And this is happening again. I mean, that's what Brexit has brought. Without Brexit, there wouldn't have been any real issue. There'd still be the long-term hope that you'd have a united, Ireland, and there probably will be at some point or other. A number of things have happened in the last 20 or 30 years that are helping. One is the relative wealth, of the southern part of Ireland. That's changed. Say going back to the end of World War II, in Northern Ireland came out of World War II wealthier, than the 26 counties, and then with the emergence of the welfare state, the benefits that people in Northern Ireland were able to get were far greater than the benefits you could get in Southern Ireland. But now, since the Celtic Tiger period, things have changed. The gross domestic product in Ireland now is about twice what it is in Northern Ireland. So that's not a disincentive, because it used to be the issue. It wasn't just whether people who were from the unionist community would want a united Ireland, but the issue also was, well, will Catholics and nationalists want to be in a united Ireland if they're not going to be able to get the same benefits? Because if you unite with a poorer country, you're not going to get the same level of benefits. And so the issue was, what percentage of people will be prepared to forego some of the wealthier benefits that we're getting from the UK, and follow their heart and their politics and take lesser amount by joining into a united Ireland. But now that's kind of turned around. The benefits and the wealth that's in Southern Ireland now would lead people to be able to, choose to be in a united Ireland for the right, well, for those reasons anyway. They won't lose out financially.
Sean, you've been talking for quite a bit and you've shared a lot of information with us. Thank you. You must be at least thirsty.
Yes,
I
I
don't know
am.
if
So as I said, if anyone is interested in the classes that are starting, the classes are starting in the next 2 weeks. So if you're interested, you could call the Irish Cultural Centre in Canton, or get back to one of us or whatever. I would send you a copy of this tomorrow, Clayton. So if anybody wants to get a copy of the presentation, you're welcome to it. And
Thank you.
And I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Sounds very good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, the one in 2 weeks you've called Ireland, 101.
Irish History 101. Yep.
So I'm going to be giving a quick overview of Ireland from 1.7 billion years ago up to today. Yeah. I'm going to be coming from a time when Ireland wasn't even, when Ireland was two little pieces of chunks of rock that were down in the southern hemisphere, and there were Belfast and Dublin were 3,000 miles apart.
So we're starting before recorded history. Yeah, significantly before.
Yeah, significantly before. Yeah, we're starting 1.7 billion years ago, right up to present day. So it'd be we'll take a look at all the major events in Irish history.
And why there's no snakes there, right?
Well, there's no snakes because after the ice age, the ice melted.
I don't have to tell people now. I just wanted to make sure we were going to cover that.
Yeah. The water was too cold for the snakes. That's why they didn't come.
All right.
Snakes don't like cold water. So by the time the water, they don't like swimming either.
Oh.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I have an exit poll. While we still have a couple of people here, I'm going to go up and put a quick exit poll. And I just want to thank everybody for coming. I am launching it here. Please let us know what you thought of Sean, how would you like me to refer to you? How would you like us to is it Dr. Murphy? Is it Professor Murphy? Is it Sean? What do you like?
Yep, Sean.
Sean.
I'm not a doctor. I'm not a professor.
Okay. Well, you certainly could earn an honorary doctorate, and you are teaching us lots. So I consider people who can serve in that capacity certainly a professor of sorts. So
yep.
I would like to.
I was a math teacher.
Math teacher. Oh, that's great. So people can let us know what they thought of Sean's presentation tonight. That's the first question. The second was, please let us know if you're going to be able to join us in 2 weeks. It's on the 19th, is the not the 26th, which I said earlier tonight, but on Tuesday the 19th is when we'll be doing Irish History 101. And then I'm also interested in what types of future programs people would like to attend. So I'll leave this poll up here for a couple of minutes. I can even share the results if people are interested, but I'll leave it up here for a couple of minutes. I'm going to go ahead and turn off. I haven't seen any chats on the YouTube live stream, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. Thank you all for joining us by YouTube. Please do reach out to me by email if you have any questions or follow-up. We will stay here on Zoom for a little bit longer, but